Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So what I'm going to do today, I'll just talk about one more topic in terms of moving into Salesforce ecosystem. So today it will be about architects. So if you're say non-Salesforce architect, could be a Microsoft architect, a Microsoft AWS architect, or sorry, when I said Microsoft, it could be an Azure architect, could be an AWS architect, NetSuite um, SAP architect, you might be wondering, hey, is it possible for me to move into Salesforce as a Salesforce architect? Now, this is a very common scenario if you're working in a company where, for some reason, Salesforce has become a strategic platform, and you being a member of an architecture community in that organization might be thinking, I've been an Azure architect, I've been an AWS architect, how fast I can get into Salesforce ecosystem so I can contribute from an architecture perspective, right? So there are two sides to this equation, right? Or in other words, the way I wanted to answer it. The first thing, right? A lot of things from an architecture perspective is transferable. Like, a lot of architects know how to work with the patterns. A lot of architects know, always to ask why question. A lot of architects do understand business perspective, the business context, and most of the architects are do if you are talking from a so most of the architects, they do understand the importance of the tech landscape with respect to the business value it can drive. So those skill sets are pretty much transferable. So you have that advantage to start with. I mean, it's way easier for an architect from a different technology landscape to come to enter into Salesforce space and perform as a Salesforce architect than someone who's new to architecture ecosystem. If you know what I'm trying to say. So that's and another challenge. So that's a positive side of it. Now the challenging side of Salesforce, like any platform, like if you're from an AWS, right, you obviously need to know a lot of services like container services, machine learning services, identity access management service, right, database services, right, Internet of Things. So if you have no idea about any of these things, right, it will make it very difficult or it will become very difficult for you to become an AWS architect. The same thing applies to Salesforce. Salesforce is a big SaaS product. There are a lot of clouds in it. There are a lot of ways you can build stuff. There are a lot of technology standpoint or technical nuggets, I would say, you need to understand before you even come up with any architecture solution. Because, for instance, right, security, right, Salesforce security works very different, right? So you have a permission sets here, you have a user group, sorry, you have a public group, you have a profiles, you have a sharing rules, and when it comes to sharing, you have different kinds of sharing. So if you don't understand these things, right, it will make it very difficult for you to become a Salesforce architect. So my advice to all of you who wanted to be a Salesforce architect, if you are from a different architecture domain, then the first thing is to get into, as I always say, go and take admin certification. That's the first thing. I would highly encourage this administrator because this admin certification will give you a deep dive about um, different components. Because one of the thing with the Salesforce ecosystem, right, and it's the same mistake and new developers often make. And I did a video on this in the last episode that if, if you're coming from a Java background or a .NET background, for instance, it's quite obvious that your first approach will be to code for any solution, right? Because why would you worry about config? Because that's not the Java and C Sharp is for, right? So just to build a solution using the language. But when it comes to Salesforce, it's not the case, right? Sometimes you think you can do that using a code, but the same solution you can do pretty much without writing a single line of code using point and click. So that's one thing. Yeah. So that's why I highly recommend you should guys to take admin certification. Is very useful. from that perspective, it will give you a decent understanding overview of the platform, right? If I look at administrator, and I've also talked about, I highly recommend you guys check out the first two videos I've did, where I spoke about how to register for an org, you know, to get your sandbox or a trial org where you can start working and playing with it. So if I look at an administrator, right? So you go here. Now in Salesforce, Trailhead is a place where you learn everything. That's pretty obvious, right? Now, it's not obvious to people who are new to Salesforce, so Trailhead is the go-to place. So you go to prepare your Salesforce administrator. Everything is in the form of badge, right? You prepare, you answer some questions, you'll get a badge. So you get a points, you get a badge, and so you can go to say Salesforce Platform Basics. You open one of them, and you will get information about what the Salesforce is and give you some things to play around with that as well, right? So that's how you learn Salesforce. And like I said, there is a learning curve because even though you're an architect, which is great, but you still need to understand the platform. So I would highly encourage you to get into this admin mode, admin cert, and get yourself certified. Unfortunately, like Salesforce is driven by certifications, the same with AWS, same with Azure. You have Azure Architect certification, right? So obviously, to become an Azure Architect, you need to understand um, Azure fundamentals, right? So the same with AWS, though, with AWS, Amazon Web Service, you do have associate architecture certification, which normally talks about different services like S3 and EC2, container service, identity access management, VPC, uh, then RDS, different kind of stuff, right? Route 53 and DNS and all kind of stuff. So you need to know those things to get certified. So consider Salesforce admin is something similar, which covers different topics at different levels. So that will give you some brief understanding about the platform capability, right? Now, if you wanted to get into a detailed architecture levels kind of things, then we got different certification. So if we go to Trailhead, credentials certification. It will take you here to go to Salesforce Architect. Now you will say, "Ooh, there's a lot of it." Right? Don't worry about it. I'm gonna talk about. There's two kinds of certification. One is the application architect, and another one is your system architect. Now, to become a system architect or an application architect, you got to do a prerequisite. There are three certification each you need to do. Say, for instance, if you wanted to be a system architect, you need to have Platform Developer 1, which is the basic one. Then you have the Integration Architect, uh, Identity Access Management Architect certification, and you need to do the Development Lifecycle Architect. So architecture, like I said, is a very specialized in Salesforce. So you need to, you can call yourself architect without having a certification. If you know this concept, like identity is a big thing, integration is a big thing. You need to know as an architect what's the best way, let's say, to integrate Salesforce with, let's say, SAP. Are you going to use point to point, or are you going to use enterprise service bus, or you're going to use middleware? And if you're going to use middleware, which middleware you're going to suggest? Are you going to use MuleSoft, or are you going to use Dell Boomi, or you're going to use something else, right? And if you say I'm going to use something else, what is driving that? Is that the license fees, the technical expertise in the team? Those things you will pretty much figure out, given your previous architecture experience. But it's good to know the out of box functionality, what you have in Salesforce, so that you can integrate with different systems. The same goes with identity, different kind of flows you can use. You can login flow, whether you can use Realme, or you can or auth you can use to integrate. You can use the JWT tokens. So you need to understand from the perspective to see what is supported out of box, so you can recommend the right architecture and right design. And we have the sharing and visibility, that's as a part of an application architect, which actually talks about the sharing and security model. Now, one thing I tell you, which is my personal observation, I've seen people in Salesforce ecosystem struggle a lot with the security, right? I've seen people having this sharing and visibility architect certification, but they struggle with permission sets, sharing group. It just makes me wonder at times. You will realize when you get into the Salesforce ecosystem, Salesforce is driven madly by certifications, right? And you also meet different people with 40 certifications, and then you realize they barely could figure out the basic things, right? So I'm not a person who's big on certification. It's nice to have, but what I really care is the real life experience. And if you're an architect, you bring that to the table, and which is a positive thing, I would say. So if you're someone who's looking to do the Salesforce uh, pathway, then I would highly recommend you give a try. Like for instance, if I wanted to get into say NetSuite tomorrow, right? I mean, for me as an architect, I wouldn't struggle when it comes to big core architecture stuff. But what I will struggle from a domain knowledge, from a platform perspective, I don't have much expertise on NetSuite, so I need to understand maybe from an architecture perspective what is supported out of box, the things you can customize, right? If I have a fairly decent understanding that with my architecture experience, I can pretty much learn the nitty gritty in 6 to 7 months time and good to go, or maybe even a shorter span of time, right? Uh, so and if you ask my personal experience, I personally believe that Salesforce is a great platform. I work in a company. I do consulting for a firm as an architect. So in that firm, where I work, it's a big government agency. We have architects from a non-Salesforce background. So I often interact with them, give them ideas, learn from them, because they often help me with the business domain and technical domain architecture perspective, and I give them my knowledge on the Salesforce ecosystem, so that the architecture from a Salesforce combines with overall business architecture uh, to drive the positive outcome. That's exactly what we try to achieve. And from that perspective, I do see that at times, architects from different domain get excited, to know about the Salesforce, and they do ask different questions, which is great. That's how you learn, right? So the reason why I wanted to do this session, right? So you must be thinking this guy talks too much. Sorry about that. It's just to make you guys understand how easy for you to get into Salesforce. So to set some prerequisites. So my question is that if you're passionate, my question is, are you really interested? If you're really interested, then come to Trailhead, give it a try. Get an admin cert first. No matter who tries to tell you this associate or BS stuff, right? It's not for an architect, right? Get into admin, try to understand the platform, and then once you're happy with it, you have fairly decent understanding. Maybe talk to a Salesforce architect if you have in your company or as a part of your business to say, hey, can you help me with other stuff, right? So I would highly recommend that if you are going to be an architect, try to understand the platform. At least get a holistic idea of the platform. Nobody expects a architect to code. It's a different story. If you're a technical architect, you might need to help out with the code. But if you're an enterprise architect, you don't really need to get into the weed when it comes to Salesforce. You just need to understand the platform capability and drive your business strategy based on that. That's all you need to do. So for that, you just need to have a fairly decent understanding about, at least from an admin perspective, you need to know what kinds of clouds we have. We have marketing cloud, we have sales cloud, we have service cloud, we have revenue cloud, we have financial service cloud, uh, and then we have a lot of third parties, ecosystem that built on top of it. And that's why we have App Exchange, where it's like an app store, so where you can download different apps. Some are paid, some are free. So depends on your business requirement. So what I'm trying to say, right? It's a great platform, and if you're really interested, have a look, play around with it, and please do watch my first video of this playlist. I'll put a link in the description below. I've explained how to register for an org, and I've also talked about Trailhead and like if someone is a midwife or other healthcare practitioner, can they get into Salesforce? Absolutely. So watch that video. You will find a value in that, and then come to this video and say if that make any sense. If you have any questions, please just put your questions in the comments below. I will try to answer whenever I can. Right. So that's why I said you guys from a different architecture skill set have a transferable skill set. And I do appreciate that when I see a different architect from a different tech domain wanted to get into Salesforce, it gives us such a boost to our technical capability. And that really something I really like to see more often, like someone from SAP getting into Salesforce, someone from SAP, Salesforce trying to, do stuff in SAP. So it's a kind of collaboration. That's exactly the way I look at it. And it's really great. So that being said, that's a tiny video I wanted to make. I hope you find this video useful. So that being said, I hope you guys have an amazing Wednesday. Adios.